The U.S. Russia relationship is about as bad as it's been at any point since the 1980s. There were no major surprises. I mean, the biggest surprise that came out of it was the fact that both countries have agreed to reinstate their ambassadors in each other's capitals at the margins. That's kind of a nice thing. And the United States did try to make clear that if ransomware attacks continue against American critical infrastructure, there will be consequences, though they weren't really spelled out. I don't think anybody is expecting that this relationship gets markedly better, certainly on big issues like the Minsk Accords on Ukraine, which the Russians are presently occupying, the arrest of Navalny, journalists that, suddenly managed to find themselves thrown out of windows. I mean, none of that is going to stop. And so this is a problematic relationship. It's the least successful part of Biden's trip. But let's remember, Trump's first trip as president, least successful part of his trip was at the end as well. He started off like in the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, remember the Orb, then Israel, all went well, then it kind of went south. That was kind of the way this trip was set up too.
So let's focus on that cybersecurity piece here, Ian, because some might make the case that Russia doesn't really matter that much anymore. That it's like the bad kid who's been suspended from high school, and everyone else will just carry on. Except Russia can be a bad actor and do bad things. On the cyber front, I think many will acknowledge they remain one of the big offenders in the world. I just want to play you clips from both press conferences, both Biden and Putin addressing this issue. Have a listen.
U.S. sources claim that the majority of cyber attacks are made from the U.S. territory. Then the second one is Canada, then two Latin American states, and then the U.K. As for Russia, it is not listed.
We have significant cyber capability, and he knows it. He doesn't know exactly what it is, but it's significant. And if, in fact, they violate these basic norms, we will respond.
So, Ian, I mean, I don't know if we even need to get into the idea that Canada is the second worst offender of cyber attacks in the world. It seems unlikely. I'm not an expert. But this is a subject that we have outright disagreement from both sides on. What is the hope of trying to bring Russia to heel on cybersecurity? Because it is a growing threat in the world.
I love the way you described the Russians as the bad kid that was suspended from high school. As you know, the Russians were thrown out of the G7+1, the G8. But that kid from high school suspended can still beat the crap out of you and, shake you down for lunch money every day. And that's kind of what the Russians are up to right now, right? I mean, they are not a significant economic power on the global stage. China's much more powerful than Russia, and that's even true in Russia's backyard, dominating the economies of Central Asia, for example. But in terms of the nuclear balance and in terms of cyber capabilities, Russia remains.
I think we have lost Ian Bremmer's feed. We're going to try to get it back there. And obviously, one of the other big developments that happened both at the G7 and from the NATO meetings is a renewed global focus on China as well as a nation that other nations should be in agreement about and its behavior on the global stage. So one of the big questions, of course, in the world is, as some people now use the term new Cold War to describe the West's new relationship with China, might be whether you see any kind of shifting in the alliances between China and Russia, which is exactly the kind of thing that I want to ask Ian Bremmer. You might have missed part of what I said there because I was filibustering just a little bit, but one of the big things that happened. Okay, so is there any real risk here that China and Russia get together in the world, which actually would feel a little bit frightening to many?
Yeah, there is more alignment between the Russians and the Chinese. I mean, Putin is incredibly cynical about the United States and American allies, in his view, wanting to undermine Russia's position. Look at NATO enlargement. Look at energy expansion, Baku Jehan. Look at, support for democratic governance in places like Ukraine, even Belarus. So you can understand that if from Putin's perspective, the idea that adhering to international norms as described by the West is really not on. And in that regard, he sees China as his only real option. So, yeah, even though China is certainly a much, much more powerful country than Russia, and that gap is growing by the day, Putin doesn't really feel like he has a choice. I think that's a problem. It's a fundamental problem for the United States.
And where do you think China stands on? Is it possible to know what China's feeling would be about being closer to Russia, including the ramifications that would have with the United States?
I think after the last week, China's going to feel only more strongly that they need to engage with the Russians. Not much was accomplished with Russia in the last week, but a level of coordination between the U.S. and its allies, its Pacific allies, Canada, the UK, and its European allies on China was a significant move. And we see that in terms of investigations into the origins of COVID. We see that in terms of this new Build Back Better world that's meant to be a competitor to the digital Belt and Road. We see it with criticisms in the communique from the G7. We even see it with burying the hatchet on trade disputes between the United States and Europe, Boeing and Airbus, so that everyone can focus more on China. And that is, of course, the one issue that also brings together Democrats and Republicans inside this maximally divided United States. So if you're Beijing and you see all of that coming down the pipe, Russia isn't a country that you want to be closer to. And I fear that that is going to be the geopolitical tension growing over the course of the coming months.
So I guess it leaves some wondering, and you've done an awful lot more than most of thinking about kind of the world order and how it's shifted since, the Bretton Woods, et cetera. It's this notion of G0, Ian. And I wonder whether you update that to G2 at some point. If we find ourselves in a very polarized world of these two spheres of influence.
I would say that you're a little closer to the emergence of G2 this week than you were a week ago. The Europeans historically don't see China through the same lens as the American government does. They're closer to the American private sector. Let's just engage because they're important economically. But Merkel is leaving power, and her successor is going to be closer to the American view on China than Merkel has been. Macron's got more challenges domestically. The new Italian Prime Minister, Draghi, has said that he's going to leave Belt and Road. Italy was the one country in the G7 that was a member. And we know Canada's issues, of course, with the two Michaels, a lot of human rights concerns. Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland really care about the idea of a values-based set of alliances that promotion of democracy really matters vis-a-vis China. So when you look at all of that, you do feel like the emergence of a counter-China bloc, despite all of our incredible economic interdependencies, which aren't going away, is becoming more significant. And that is going to be harder to navigate, of course, for everyone in the private sector that, we typically talk to on this network.
Well, and I guess that's where countries like Canada have walked this line, Ian, of kind of the realpolitik around wanting to deal economically and put into a separate category all of the other things we care about, including human rights. Jumping back to Russia, my analogy falls apart when we consider that it's occupying Ukraine. And there are people that have very strong feelings about that, including that, much of the world has stood idly by while that happens. It raises the question of, while we draw lines here, are we willing, we the West, NATO, willing to follow through militarily if it's required, if China were to become expansionist in its aims?
Yeah, for Canada, of course, not a lot of economic interdependence with Russia, but a lot of Ukrainians that vote in Canada, and that drives very significantly on top of the human rights issue. When it comes to China, you saw the one state, two systems that they ripped up very quickly with Hong Kong. There were some limited sanctions, no one was intervening significantly, meaningfully into China, into Chinese business when they decided to do that. Not the U.S., not the U.K., not Canada. Now, Taiwan's a very different story, which the Americans provide a lot of ability for the Taiwanese to defend themselves. And I am someone, as a consequence, that I'm skeptical that China would suddenly make the decision to invade. So I don't think we're close to direct military confrontation, but the economic state